Seoul, South Korea is a city of many colors, many styles, and many flavors. And seemingly everywhere you turn in Seoul, you'll see Samsung, a company that does, well, many things. It makes semiconductors and TVs, cargo ships and refrigerators. They even sell insurance. But they're best known for producing one of the most dominant lines of smartphones in the world, right up there next to Apple. Yes, Samsung does many things. But one thing Samsung does not do often is invite tech journalists to the very factories where these futuristic phones are made. Until now. I'm Dan Howley, and this is What's Next with Samsung. Okay, it's 3:30 a.m. New York time. We're going to Seoul, South Korea to go hands-on with Samsung's new Galaxy Z Flip 5 and Galaxy Z Fold 5. But maybe even more exciting is the fact that we're also going to Samsung's factory where they build their latest foldable phones. That's pretty cool. There's more to the story. First, I need a coffee though. Okay, so here's the broader picture. The smartphone in your pocket hasn't changed for years. Sure, its camera and processor take better photos and are more powerful, but overall, it's still the same black rectangle that you've always had. And that's what Samsung is trying to change with its newest foldable phones. But changing people's habits can be difficult, especially when it comes to their most important gadget.
Yeah, the biggest difficulty is a multi-trillion-dollar company called Apple. It comes down to one application, iMessage. When Americans got hooked on iMessage, we just couldn't get off. But yeah, it's iMessage.
But there's reason to believe Samsung could be the company to inspire a larger move towards foldables, even if that ultimately means inspiring Apple to follow suit.
But I do think Apple is closely watching Samsung. I think they're closely watching foldable displays. And they're also waiting, quite honestly, till there's a manufacturer who can produce enough of them for Apple.
For years, Samsung has stayed ahead of the curve, outfitting their phones with wireless charging, massive displays, well before Apple was doing any of that. And that history of innovation continues with the Z Flip and Z Fold lines, which are now, and this is important, in their 5th generation. That kind of commitment by Samsung is worth noting, especially when you consider their global market share and influence. A 15-hour flight is a good chance to talk through some numbers. According to Counterpoint Research, global smartphone revenue hit $409 billion in 2022, down from $450 billion in 2021. In Q1 2023, Samsung controlled 22% of the market, a virtual tie with Apple's 21%. In the US, Apple dominates with 57% of the market. Samsung, according to StatCounter, has just 27%. But in South Korea, it's a different story. Here in South Korea, Samsung controls 63% of the smartphone market. Apple, just 31%. And it's pretty clear the moment you step off your plane, pretty much everyone's using a Samsung smartphone. Kind of like a Samsung press event. Yeah, so we're touring Samsung's facilities during the rainy season in South Korea. It also happens to be incredibly humid. I am acclimated to New York, so I'm basically just wet all the time. Big old sweaty baby. We're going to take a bus now over to Samsung's Digital City. It's basically a massive campus. I mean, calling it a city is the right thing. Let's go. I've been to Google's campus, huge. Apple's campus, huge. This is right up there with both of those. So I'm here at the tour of Samsung's facilities. We're going to go get a deeper look at some of their R&D stuff. And you can see these huge buildings behind me. These are all Samsung buildings. This is just part of the complex here. It's a big kind of to-do that we're getting this access to the facilities. We won't be able to film the more sensitive areas, but still we'll be able to get a look, and then I'll be able to write about it. So stay tuned. We just got out of Samsung's quality assurance lab, basically showing how they test all of their devices. We saw different types of machines that they kind of run the actual foldables through, as well as their watches. Different types of drop tests, tumbler tests, different types of ways they drop it on different surfaces, heat, humidity, cold, water submersion, anechoic chambers. I got to go in one, which is always fun. And really, this is a part of Samsung's broader push to show that these are kind of the future for their smartphone line. Hey, we're heading down on the subway. We're gonna go check out Gangnam, where I also happen to be staying because I'm bougie like that. Which way? We gotta get that. It's like 100,000% humidity, I think. I've been on this train for 5 minutes, and I've already spotted 5 people with foldable phones, whether they're the Z Fold or the Z Flip. People are using them here a lot. We're gonna go check out the new Z Fold 5 and Z Flip 5. Get some hands-on with those bad boys and see what they're all about. So this is what we're here for. This is the Galaxy Z Flip 5, and this is the Galaxy Z Fold 5. They're slick, fancy, have new hinges, but they're also pretty pricey. Starting at $999 for the Flip and $1799 for the Fold, they're also competing with Google's new Pixel Fold and Motorola's Razr Plus, as well as a handful of Chinese foldables. As of now, Apple has yet to join the party. But as you might expect, manufacturing something like this is a bit more complicated than your standard candy bar style smartphone. So to see exactly how they're built, I got up at 5 a.m. to take a 3-hour bus ride from Seoul to Samsung's factory in Gumi. We're here on Samsung's Gumi campus. Basically, this is where they manufacture some of the biggest products that they sell, especially their smartphone line. You can hear the cicadas kind of going crazy in the background, but this is where they really do put together the smartphones that end up in people's hands. So let me sketch out what I saw inside for you. Inside Samsung's Gumi factory, the company pumps out everything from earbuds to tablets to smartphones. On one floor, custom-made robotic arms grab strips of printed circuit boards that are then filled with electronics components as small as 2 millimeters and passed through an oven to solder everything into place. On a separate floor, an assembly line of yellow Samsung-branded arms put together the company's Galaxy S23, while another line builds the Galaxy Z Fold 5. But what I mostly saw inside the factory was Samsung's massive commitment to foldable phones as its future. And that dedication was even more apparent during the company's Unpacked event. Samsung's foldable strategy provides the company with 2 things: a unique way to get consumers genuinely interested in smartphones again, and, more importantly, a means to combat arch rival Apple. With its lineup of foldable phones, the company has something Apple doesn't: a new, exciting form factor that gets people talking. Nearly everyone I showed a Flip or Fold to was immediately impressed with the phone's design and styling. And the company isn't stopping there. Samsung executives hinted at further building out their foldable phones in the future. Unfortunately, as you might expect, they didn't offer any concrete plans. After spending a week with Samsung, checking out its facilities and speaking to some of its representatives, it's clear the company sees foldables as its future. But does that mean that a foldable is in your future? Will you give up that stale black rectangle for something that bends? It's too difficult to tell. While Samsung and its Chinese competitors have embraced the form factor, Motorola now has its Razr Plus, and Google has the Pixel Fold. The one company that has yet to go for a foldable is Apple. In 2021, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman said the company was exploring the kind of technology to make a foldable iPhone. More recently, though, he said they're focusing on an iPad. If, however, Apple does come out with a foldable iPhone and Samsung is still rocking it, then foldables may be the future. And that square rectangle in your pocket just might not be that long for this world.
Dan Howley, happily for him, is now in a nice, overly air-conditioned studio, back from South Korea. Obviously, you're back. You've got a lot of insight into Samsung, a company that we don't hear directly from about a lot, especially here in the United States, and especially compared to Apple. So give us some of your key takeaways here about this phone and about what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I saw probably in Seoul is how prevalent Samsung obviously is, and that being it's Samsung's home country, right? And so it's the same thing here in the US with Apple. But the major thing was just how many foldable phones were around, right? That was something that I noticed the minute we landed in South Korea. We were looking for those, but literally, I mean, I was on the train, I saw people just, hanging out with them, trying to take...
Just quickly, Dan, if there are already a lot of foldables there, what is different? You went there to see this new foldable, right? So if all these foldables are already out there, they sell a lot of them, what's different about this new one?
So when Samsung first launched its first foldables, there were technical problems with them, right? There was an issue where there's a cover, sort of a film on the screen, because it literally folds in half, right? And especially with these, they fold flush. So they had to pull them back at first because of problems with the build of them. And then since then, they've kind of been perfecting them. The first ones had a little tiny display on the front because it was like, okay, well, I'm going to flip this phone open, I'm going to close it, and then I don't have access to a screen. And now really what we're seeing is kind of the perfection of these. And that's what Samsung is doing here. And it's also the point where they're saying, okay, we have our dominant Galaxy S line, right? The Galaxy S23 is their most recent and flagship. But now foldables are taking front and center, right? And so at this event that I went to in South Korea where they debuted this, it was the first time they had it in Seoul, right? So it was a big deal. I mean, if you walked around this area called the COEX Center, it was just plastered with just digital billboards of Samsung foldables. And so they had TM Rowe, who's the head of mobile for Samsung Global. Sydney Sweeney came out. One of the people from BTS, Suga, came out. And so it was a big, big deal. And so they're clearly positioning this as the future of their smartphone line, as well as smartphones in general. And part of that then is to pull users from Apple and iOS over. And I mean, I swear if I hear this commercial ever again, it'll be too soon. They just kept playing it prior to the event kickoff, but it's about people saying, I would never use an Android phone, and then someone flips open a Z Flip, and immediately runs to go buy one. Wow. So they're clearly, I mean, you can't telegraph, it's not even telegraphing. I mean, they're just smashing you over the head with it. But, they're really incredible pieces of technology. And, I got to go in and see how they're actually built. And the original fear was that they weren't going to be as sturdy as regular smartphones. But, I mean, they dunk them in, water for a half hour. They blast them with dust. There was one test where they have them in these giant, I don't even know, contraptions, let's say, because I'm a 1930s prospector. And you would put it in there, there were areas where you could put your hands in to feel what the temperature was. And one was ice cold. I mean, you put your hand in, you're like, that's good. And the other one felt like just, 98% humidity, 115 something degrees. Right. I imagine it's what crawling into a Tauntaun was, like Han Solo and Empire Strikes Back. Really weird reference, but it was just incredible to see how they've gone from, we have to pull these back to now they're up there with, your regular smartphone as far as quality.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been fascinating to watch as well. And that commercial itself sounds like just an example of text to go green, I guess.
Oh,
for all the Drake fans out there. Dan, thanks so much for taking the trip and bringing some of these stories back.
I'll go wherever you guys want me to.
Done deal. All right. We got a few more. The global smartphone market is struggling. According to IDC Mobile Phone Tracker, shipments are expected to fall by 4.7% year over year during 2023, the lowest volume in a decade. But as shipments fall, Apple's share of the market creeps up, expected to hit its highest level in the global market share ever of 19.9% this year. Still, Android operating systems and Samsung's phones, they're dominating on a global level. Can Apple catch up? It's the big question. Joining us now, we've got Nabila Popal, who is the IDC Research Director, and David McQueen, ABI Research Director, and we still got with us Yahoo Finance tech reporter Dan Howley. Great to have you all here. Nabila, I want to begin with you, and when you think about 2023 and how critical of a moment this is for all of the smartphone market, but especially for a company in Apple, is this make or break?
Well, I think that's a great question. I just watched the segment earlier, and it shows how far Samsung has come and continues to innovate. I think this will be, our data is showing how, because of the declining market and ongoing success of Apple, it continues to dominate at least the premium market. And this year will be the year where it reaches, its peak share of 20% annually, which hasn't happened before.
David, let's talk about the foldable, shall we? Obviously, Samsung has put a lot of resources into this, betting that it is going to gain share because not that many people have foldable phones of the overall total. Is that the right strategy to take, and is that going to help it edge out Apple?
Yeah, good point. I think, as you mentioned, that sort of level of difference in a device that's just otherwise just a black piece of glass, having foldable in there makes perfect sense. And it's high price, so it's competing at the high end. It has to, really, at the moment. Some have tried to get that pricing down. I think Motorola, particularly, and some of the Chinese vendors, very difficult. So I can see why Samsung are doing that, but that's as you saw in the montage there, it's this 5th generation now, and it's still, well, our numbers show probably less than 2% of the overall smartphone market. So it's not really reached out as far and as wide as expected, actually. And Samsung, although leading, I think like 80+% of the foldable market, it's clearly not resonating as well with the higher end user. And perhaps as well, COVID probably didn't help because it's a very tactile experience, as probably as you found. When you get to use one, it's you've got to go and use it and touch it and realize, well, why do I need one of these when I've got my other piece of glass? So I can see why they're going that way, because they want to differentiate their products at the higher end when they're competing with Apple, who don't have one of those devices at the moment. But it's it's a challenge, and those creating the screen. The hinge, the amount of design that goes into that hinge is unbelievable, and they're still quite thick. That's why I quite like the flip as more than the fold, actually. But anyway, I think they're doing the right things by pushing foldables, but whether they need Apple in there to really sort of spark in that market. To really get it going, because I say many have tried, that remains to be seen.
Nabila, I want to ask you about why we're seeing Apple's market share creep up, right? This is according to IDC's numbers, one of the worst smartphone markets in decades. Is it just because they're playing in the premium segment? Is it that they're able to then push out and, I guess, attract customers who are more interested in that? Is it because of upgrade cycles? Is it the iPhone 15, or presumably what's to be the 15? What is the reason that Apple is kind of pulling away like this?
So you've hit on so many points there. So if you think about the whole smartphone market, right? Let's just go top down. The entire market has been in decline since 2017, really, with the exception of 2021. We've been in 6-7 consecutive years of decline. And while this is declining, the premium share has been going up. So let's look at pre-pandemic and post, right? Pre-pandemic premium phones, which we classify as $800 plus, have gone from 10% share of the market to 20% now for the first half of 23. And a lot of premium, to be precise, 71% of premium market is Apple. And that's, that shows you, perfect, the chart right there shows a trend that since 2019, Apple had only 63% share, and you can see Samsung was close to 30%. Samsung struggled with maintaining, and that's really been their effort the last 5 years or so, is to gain share with Apple in the premium segment. And that's, as you can see, their share dipped as low as 15%, and that's right about when they dropped the note. But in the last couple of years, they have quickly recouped 7 points of that share, reaching about 22% now. So it's really neck to neck. I think 5 years ago you would say there was another third player viable, but now it's really an Apple and Samsung market, and this is their pain point because that's where the dollars are, right? Premium devices, 800 above, the although majority of the smartphone market is still, below $400, but this is where the money is. So everyone, not to say that the other players don't want share of this premium, but they really, it's very hard for any other brand name to, even if they were to launch a device, and they actually have in China, especially with the drop of Huawei, who had, premium share and was neck to neck with Apple in that market. Once Huawei's dropped, and actually that's another point why Apple's numbers and share in the premium have gone up globally, is their rise in China. With Huawei's decline, Apple was a clear benefactor. Now almost a quarter of their shipments are coming from the China market. But at that time, that's when the other players were, with Huawei declining and other local brands, Chinese brands themselves, right? Be it Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi, really trying to get in. They launched devices, they pushed their premium products, but consumers, are not going to spend, or they don't want to spend over $800 or $1,000 on a brand name that's not Apple or Samsung. So it's really been the Samsung and Apple rivalry.
And that price is extremely important in today's consideration for consumers. But, the cultural components are also extremely important too. And David, I wonder, for a consumer that for decades now has had to think about the cultural determining factor of their connectivity or the battery of their device or even the color of the bubbles that pop up when they're texting with someone, what is the next cultural determining factor that could move this market one way or another?
Oh gosh, yeah, good question. Because I think even going back to something like Apple, I mean, is it going to be the applications? Is it what services and what functions you can do on your phone, or how it interacts with your TV at home or your smart home devices? Is that going to be the next way forward, where the device you use is not really that important? It's what you use it for. So your experience within that product portfolio you have. I think that's going to be. I think that's going to become quite key moving forward. I think that the brands like Apple and Samsung have got to look at ways they can make money, because as we just heard, this market is really matured and it's slowing. And only the top guys, Apple particularly, can squeeze any money, any margin out of it. So how do they make money elsewhere? And Samsung being so going back to the sort of Samsung story, being a really devices player, they don't own any platform. They don't don't anymore. They don't have the app store that Apple does. It sort of can fall back on that. So, interesting, because I mean, on the one hand, you've got the different services and applications, and then there's the foldable, and we have rollable types of displays moving forward. I mean, again, very expensive, but are they going to come along sometime soon? So that whole ecosystem of the experience for the user, not necessarily device centric, that could be a way that brands will find, other ways of earning revenue, or again, revenue streams.
We're talking about the high-end market, and I think you were alluding to Huawei earlier, saying that, there used to be a third player globally, and now I believe it was yesterday or today, depending on the time zone you're in, but they announced a newer smartphone that seems to be as though it can play in the high-end market. So they're developing their own chips. I guess with a potential resurgence in Huawei, what does that then mean for the high-end market and for Apple and Samsung, especially in China, where obviously you said 25% of Apple's shipments come from, and they've become so dependent on?
Sure, no, that's a great question, and something we've been talking about the last few days internally, and as well as and what we're definitely, if Huawei gets climbs back up, it's a big challenge for Apple, especially in China, because in China Samsung basically has no share there, and that's a huge market that it's really that Apple's competing in and of itself, and right now with no third, with no second player. So if Huawei climbs back, and keep in mind, Huawei had majority share of the premium, significant share of the premium market in China for a while. And since, the last few years, that's when it's gone down. So if they were to climb back up, it could really harm Apple's, not just, share in China, but global volumes. And that could be a pain point and something to consider.
Thank you so much, Nabila Popal, IDC Research Director, and thanks to David McQueen, ABI Research Director, and of course, our Yahoo Finance Senior Tech Reporter, Dan Howley.